Greetings, friends. I just wanted to bring this article to you in light of the coming encyclical that is going to be released to the public here within the next few days, I do believe. However, there has been some leaked information regarding the encyclical. But before I get into that, what this video is going to entitle is a reading from John Robbins' book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania. And the reason why I'm going to be reading a portion of this book is it goes right in line with what this encyclical is going to portray. That it is really, what it really is a continuation of a long line of encyclicals regarding secular issues, economic, social, and political matters, which has its roots in Marxist in Marxist matters, which really, the Marxism really got it. It's really came from Rome. Its beginnings was in Rome, anyways, and it's But anyway, and it also is going to deal with the aspect of sustainable development and the redistribution of wealth and these types of things. So it's going to be very interesting encyclical, especially in the wake of this article that just came out. Pope Francis warns of destruction of world's ecosystem in leaked encyclical. And the Vatican condemns early release of document in which Pontiff calls on people to change their lifestyles and energy consumption or face grave consequences. Now, it's one thing if Al Gore or whatever says this, but when you hear this phrase, grave consequences, coming from the Antichrist or the man of sin, the son of perdition, or the little horn, I take notice, okay? Because this is the creme de the crop, basically. So, Pope Francis will this week call for changes in lifestyles and energy consumption to avert the unprecedented destruction of the ecosystem. Before the end of this century, according to a leaked draft of a papal encyclical. So, before the end of this century, according to a leaked draft of a papal encyclical. So, in a document released by an Italian magazine on Monday, the Pontiff will warn that failure to act would have grave consequences for all of us. End quote. Francis also called for a new global political authority tasked with tackling the reduction of pollution and the development of poor countries and regions. His appeal echoed that of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who in the 2009 encyclical proposed a kind of super UN to deal with the world's economic problems and injustices. Here's another portion of the leaked document. Quote, humanity is called to take note of the need for changes in lifestyles and changes in methods of production and consumption to combat this warming, or at least the human causes that produce and accentuate it, he wrote in the draft. Numerous scientific studies indicate that the greater part of the global warming in recent decades is due to the great concentration of greenhouse gases given off above all because of human activity. Now, this paragraph here is very interesting. The Pope will also single out those obstructing solutions in an apparent reference to climate change deniers, the draft states, the attitudes that stand in the way of a solution, even among believers, range from negation of the problem to indifference to convenient resignation or blind faith in technical solutions. So, I mean, it seems like there's going to be a lot in this encyclical when it's fully released. Now, back to this America National Catholic Review article. Clues to the encyclical Part 2. There was a Part 1, I guess, of this. A long tradition of papal teaching on social, economic, and political matters. Francis' Encyclical on the Environment will take its place among at least 10 other papal letters issued over the past 125 years that have not only offered specific judgment and guidance on matters of public morality, but have interrogated their philosophical and moral assumptions from the perspective of Scripture and doctrine. So while an encyclical on the environment is well an expansion into new moral territory, such expansions are part of a well-established tradition. Further on in the article, it states, the Second Vatican Council taught that in order to carry forth the work of Christ, the Church has always had the duty of scrutinizing the signs of the times and of interpreting them in the light of the gospel. And which gospel is that? Well, obviously, that's the Vatican's gospel. It's another gospel. It's not the gospel of the Bible. This duty can be traced to the Hebrew prophets, who spoke God's judgment on the events of history, making no distinction between secular and religious realms. In the modern era, the Church has struggled to balance respect for the growth of technical spheres of knowledge such as economics, medicine, and psychology, with the need to preserve the right to judge their moral dimensions and to interrogate their philosophical premises. This struggle is evident since the birth of modern Catholic social teaching in the papacy of Pope Leo XIII, and has repeatedly expanded into additional fields since then, or in other words, socialism. So with that, I'm going to be concentrating on one of the encyclicals that is going to pattern this encyclical that is going to be released here in a few days. And I'm going to read out of chapter 3, entitled Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working classes. And this will kind of give you kind of an overview of what's going on. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I am going to read a few pages of it. So, again, I am reading from Ecclesiastical Megalomania, chapter 3, which is titled Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working class. So I'm just going to read this verbatim, and then you'll have an idea of what this encyclical is going to entail. One of the Roman Church State's most influential statements on economic matters in the 1891 is the 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working classes. In this encyclical, the Roman Church State allied herself with the proletariat, which in Marxism is the great and final enemy of the capitalist order. The encyclical's Marxism is so blatant that one Roman Catholic writer declared that much of the encyclical Rerum Novarum appeared only to repeat in more orthodox language what Marx had said 10 years before. Marx's Das Kapital had been published in 1881. More recently, the Marxist-turned-Roman Catholic Eugene Genovese wrote, quote, "The Marxists were right. The 20th century has been a century of the general crisis of capitalism. Even if they erred badly on the nature of that crisis, which has been primarily a crisis of the spirit engendered by the loss of faith in God and a transcendent law, still, the Marxist critique of capitalism had much in common with the critique offered in Rerum Novarum, much as did the critique offered by the organic conservatives of 19th century Europe and by the southern slaveholders in our own country." For centuries, the Roman Church State had resisted the advance of the Reformation and its economic system, capitalism, which was basically the economic system of Protestantism, which is biblical. Capitalism, you can read about capitalism in Romans 13. It talks directly about that. In opposing capitalism, it had allied itself with the medieval aristocracy. Now, when that aristocracy was disappearing, a new ally had to be found. The Austrian economist Mises wrote in his book on socialism in 1922, quote, "Historically, it is easy to understand the dislike which the Roman Church has shown for economic liberty and political liberalism in any form. It was liberalism that undermined the power of the classes that has for centuries been closely bound up with the Roman Church. The Roman Church stubbornly resented modernity and the modern spirit. What wonder, then, that it allied itself with those whom resentment had driven to wish for the breakup of this wonderful new world? Indeed, there are paragraphs, if not pages, in the Communist Manifesto that might have been written by the Pope or any other reactionary rather than by Marx and Engels. Here's an example. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other bond between man and man than naked self-interest and callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. In other words, the freedom of free trade is something that's done by the unconscious, meaning you have, if you believe in a free market and the right to private property, you do not have a conscious way of thinking. You're unconscious, basically. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil, and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation." End quote. Despite, or rather because of Rerum Novarum's reactionary character, Pius XI, writing in 1931, declared that Rerum Novarum, however, stood out in this, that it laid down for all mankind unerring rules for the right solution of the difficult problem of human solidarity, called the social question. Subsequent popes have been equally effusive in their praise for Rerum Novarum. John the 23rd, in Mater et Magistra, wrote, quote, "By far the most notable evidence of the social teaching and action which the Church has set forth through the centuries undoubtedly is a very distinguished encyclical letter, Rerum Novarum, issued 70 years ago. The norms and recommendations contained therein were so momentous that their memory will never fall into oblivion." End quote. And again, whenever you hear the phrase social teaching coming from Rome, think socialism. Pius XI, in his Encyclical celebrating the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, wrote, quote, "With regard to the civil power, Leo XIII boldly passed beyond the restrictions imposed by liberalism and fearlessly proclaimed the doctrine that the civil power is more than the mere guardian of law and order. It is true indeed that a just freedom of action should be left to individual citizens and families, but this principle is only valid as long as the common good is secure and no injustice is entailed." End quote. So, in this statement, Pius XI said that Leo XIII fearlessly and boldly passed beyond the restrictions on state power imposed by liberalism. Those restrictions, as Pius XI explained, were that civil power is merely the guardian of law of order. It was that view of government, the Apostle Paul's view in Romans 13, that Leo XIII boldly and fearlessly attacked. Of course, there was little to be feared, since Pius XI himself, in the same encyclical, described the principles of liberalism as tottering in 1891. And here's an excerpt from that. Quote, "In fact, the Encyclical Rerum Novarum completely overthrew those tottering tenets of liberalism which had long hampered effective interference by the government, and it prevailed upon the peoples to develop their social policy more intensely and on truer lines, and encouraged the elite among Catholics to give such efficacious help and assistance to rulers of the state that in legislative assemblies they were not infrequently the formant advocates of the new policy. Furthermore, not a few recent laws dealing with social questions were originally proposed to the suffrages of the people's representatives by ecclesiastics thoroughly imbued with Leo's teaching, who afterward, with watchful care, promoted and fostered their execution." End quote. Pius XI told us that the Encyclical Rerum Novarum was instrumental in ending laissez-faire capitalism in the 20th century by ushering in the era of effective interference by the government. Leo XIII had encouraged Roman Catholics to influence their various civil governments, and Pius XI told us that they have done so. In fact, they have been the foremost advocates of the new policy of interference. Indeed, Pius XI disclosed that in many cases, not a few, new laws were originally proposed by ecclesiastics, that is, by bishops and priests themselves, who afterwards promoted and fostered their execution. Pius XI's claims, though they need no confirmation, are corroborated by a column Joe Klein wrote for Newsweek February 19, 1996, titled "A Lunch Toward Love," telling us that Pat Buchanan, who at that time was running for president, has got religion. Klein explained, quote, "The religion is Roman Catholicism, the most significant in American politics, the ultimate swing vote. Catholics were the heart of the New Deal coalition. They were the Daily Machine in Chicago, the Cutley Machine in Boston, Tammany Hall in New York. Jimmy Carter was the last Democrat to win a Catholic majority. Clinton got 43% of their support in 1992. Perot had 20. That leaves 37% for Bush. But Catholics voted overwhelmingly 57% for Democratic congressional candidates." End quote. Much of the interference by federal, state, and local governments in the affairs of citizens, both Joe Klein and the papacy have told us, is due to Roman Catholic influence in American politics. Corrupt municipal political machines were constructed and ordered by Roman Catholics, following the church-state support for a policy of effective interference. Tammany Hall, the Daily Machine, the Curley Machine, and so on. Klein could have mentioned much more. Following Vatican directives, Roman Catholic politicians, legislators, and intellectuals brought us the progressive movement, the labor union movement, the graduated income tax, the New Deal, and the growth of government in the United States. The growth of government was not only in the United States, of course, perhaps the United States, because it is the nation in which biblical Christianity had the most impact. It is also the country where the least growth of government has occurred. In other nations, in which Roman Catholic influence was greater, governments became even more socialist than they did in the United States. In Italy, for example, an overwhelmingly Roman Catholic country, the Communist Party was once the largest communist party in the world outside the Soviet Union and China. The nationalization, taxation, and regulation of private enterprise and life have progressed much further in other countries than they have in the United States. One of the reasons is that Roman Catholicism theoretically justifies and has historically fostered authoritarian interventionists, not to say totalitarian, governments. Pius XI, not wanting to boast, of course, wrote in his encyclical, Quagesimo Anno, 1931, quote, We do not, of course, deny that even before the Encyclical of Leo, some rulers have provided for the more urgent needs of the working classes, and had checked the more flagrant acts of injustice perpetrated against them. But after the apostolic voice had sounded from the chair of Peter, the apostolic voice had sounded from the chair of Peter throughout the world, the leaders of the nation became at last more fully conscious of their obligations and set to work seriously to promote a broader social policy. And that's true. I mean, when the Pope speaks, people bow. That's just a fact. Rerum Novarum, by clearly aligning the Roman Church state with the working classes and against capitalism, thus fostering class warfare, was the voice of moral authority needed to ensure the development of effectiveness interference by all governments in the 20th century. Pius XI wrote, quote, "It is not surprising, therefore, that under the teaching and guidance of the Church, Roman Catholic Church, many learned priests and laymen earnestly devoted themselves to the problem of elaborating social and economic science in accordance with the conditions of our age. Under the guidance and in light of Leo's encyclical Rerum Novarum, 1891, was thus evolved a truly Christian social science, which continues to be fostered and enriched daily by the tireless labors of those picked men whom we have named the auxiliaries of the Church. Nor were these the only blessings which followed from the encyclical. The doctrine of Rerum Novarum began little by little to penetrate among those who, being outside Catholic unity, do not recognize the authority of the Church, and these Catholic principles of sociology gradually became part of the intellectual heritage of the whole human race." So what does that mean? That even though it may seem like people are not going along with the beast system, subconsciously they already are. Thus, too, we rejoice that the Catholic truths proclaimed so vigorously by our illustrious predecessor, Leo XIII, are advanced and advocated not merely in non-Catholic books and journals, but frequently also in legislative assemblies and in courts of justice. Pius XI here discloses the enormous influence of Rerum Novarum had not only within the church state, but also in non-Catholic intellectual circles worldwide, and in political and judicial activity worldwide. He refers darkly to those picked men whom we have named the auxiliaries of the Church, who have been so instrumental in ending the free enterprise system of the 19th century and substituting a system of effective interference by government in the 20th century. Who those picked men are, I do not know. Now, obviously, it has continued into the 21st century. It has not changed. It's the same thing. And again, I can't stress enough that even though it seems like there are some people that are not bowing down to the beast, what they don't realize is they already are subconsciously. Just because of the systems they agree with, contracts they sign, loans they sign, and these types of things. Before we continue our discussion of Rerum Novarum and the economic thought of the Roman Church state, we ought to define capitalism, okay? And I'm going to close with this. Capitalism, which is sometimes called the free enterprise system, the private property order, or laissez-faire, is the economic system in which individuals and groups are free to own property of all sorts. That means without a mortgage, without loans and entitlements, without taxation. That's capitalism. Okay? And that's biblical. And to dispose of it as they see fit. It is the economic counterpart to the political system of limited government, in which the only functions of government are the punishment of evildoers, that is, criminals, and the praise of the good. So basically, evildoers, criminals, and the praise of good. So those that do not praise the good, that do not have the praise of the good, and these types of things, those are to be punished by the only functions that government should have, which is in the second table of the law under Romans 13. Man's responsibility to man. In a purely capitalist system, governments does not interfere with private property, free association, freedom of contract, or the other freedoms protected in the Bill of Rights. Its only function is the apprehension and punishment of criminals and the protection of life and property from criminal action. In a capitalist system, government does not own or control the means of production, subsidize churches or other institutions, provide or pay for education, retirement benefits, health insurance, recreation, or any of the other innumerable goods and services provided by governments at the end of the 20th century. Capitalism is not a system of greed, as its myriad detractors, including the Roman Church state, have alleged. The German sociologist Max Weber established that point a century ago in his seminal book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Weber argued, the impulse to acquisition, pursuit of gain, of money, of the greatest possible amount of money, has in itself nothing to do with capitalism. This impulse exists and has existed among waiters, physicians, coachmen, artists, prostitutes, dishonest officials, soldiers, nobles, crusaders, gamblers, and beggars. One may say that it has been common to all sorts that conditions of men at all times and in all countries of the earth, wherever the objective possibility of it is or has been given, unlimited greed for gain is not in the least identical with capitalism, and is still less its spirit. Capitalism may even be identical with the restraint or at least a rational tempering of this irrational impulse, but capitalism is identical with the pursuit of profit and forever renewed profit by means of continuous rational capitalistic enterprise. Weber pointed out that far from encouraging unscrupulousness and sharp practices, capitalism curbs them. So I'm going to close this on that note. And so basically, when this encyclical comes out, you can expect guaranteed that this is going to be more of the same, but it is going to be this whole social economic system with political matters and the aspect of government interference through the Roman Church state is going to be increased through this encyclical. Yes, it's going to have the aspect of climate change, which again is an aspect of anti-capitalist policies, okay? And and obviously, a socialist, a Marxist, can't have that. And obviously this encyclical is going to follow right in line with Rerum Novarum and other encyclicals that fell in line post Rerum Novarum's encyclical. So I figured I'd come at you with this video, and I hope you've gotten something from it. And until next time, truth be told, truth be known, stay safe, God bless. See you next time. Bye-bye.